what they did. I appreciate my friend from Minnesota allowing me to speak prior to him. You now have 16 minutes under the order.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President. I certainly support the statement of the distinguished senator from Nevada. Returning to the Jobs Act and to Senator Graham's excellent amendment, I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor and have this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Graham-Dayton Amendment. And as Senator Graham pointed out to our colleagues, this bill is called the Jobs Act. In fact, in the House, they call it the American Jobs Act because, as we all know, we're missing a lot of jobs in America today. Over 8 million Americans are out of work. Many have exhausted their unemployment benefits because they can't find work anywhere. Now, this amendment, Senator Graham's, would make the bill live up to its name. You could call it the Put the Jobs into the Jobs Act amendment. And it also would put the truth into that title. Because the truth now is that most of this bill has nothing to do with providing jobs, at least not American jobs. It provides additional tax cuts to already profitable corporations, whether they provide jobs or not. According to a recent Washington Post article on the bill, it is, quote, one of the most complex, special interest riddled corporate tax bills in years, lawmakers, Senate aides, and tax lobbyists say. The 930-page epic is packed with $170 billion in tax cuts aimed at cruise ship operators, foreign dog race gamblers, NASCAR track owners, bow and arrow manufacturers, and Oldsmobile dealers, to name a few. Continuing on to quote the article, even one of the tax lobbyists involved in drafting it conceded that the bill, quote, has risen to a new level of sleaze, close quote. And I think that, my friends, is quite instructive in its statement. Even one of the tax lobbyists involved in drafting it. Now, I'm not on the Senate Finance Committee. I'm told that that committee, like the Appropriations Committee, requires many years of seniority before someone can gain access to it. So I don't know what goes on in the drafting of legislation, but when the article says the tax lobbyists are involved in drafting this bill that's before us, or as my colleague Senator Graham said, in drafting the additions to this bill that are not before us, that are in these so-called manager's amendments, which are not disclosed to those of us voting on this, which are not disclosed to the American people, then there's something pretty putrid in that process. And in fact, the provisions that the article mentions, questionable as they are, aren't even the worst provisions in this legislation. This bill contains over $39 billion worth of tax advantages to American businesses and investors for their foreign operations. At a time when we say that we're concerned about losing American jobs to foreign businesses, and we should be concerned, we should be alarmed, this bill would make it more profitable and thus more appealing to expand foreign businesses instead of ones in the United States. Now, why in the world would we want to do that? Most of these provisions are rich man's tax avoidance games and gimmicks. For example, U.S. businesses or individuals can claim a tax credit on their U.S. taxes equal to any foreign taxes they've paid. Now, a tax credit is a dollar-for-dollar reduction in the amount of the tax that's owed. So this arrangement means that the U.S. Treasury gets paid last. If some company here owes the French government $100 in taxes and the U.S. government $150 in taxes, the company pays the French government the $100 it owes, and it only pays the U.S. government $50. If foreign taxes were treated as a business expense, like any other cost of doing business, the loss to the U.S. Treasury would be far less severe. But this bill goes even farther in the other direction. This would allow the company or business or the individual to be able to use those foreign tax credits for 20 years into the future in order to reduce their future U.S. taxes owed. Now, most United States citizens can't do that. A farmer with additional revenues, profits in a good year, a salesman with high sales and therefore high commissions has to pay higher taxes on his or her income for that year. They can't finagle their incomes and expenses over the next 20 years to lower their tax liabilities. As I said, these are rich man's games and gimmicks. And the other foreign tax breaks are pretty much the same. They're just more ways to avoid paying U.S. taxes owed on U.S. profits or income. More special treatment for businesses in other countries, employing workers in those other countries, jobs, many of which used to be here in this country for American workers. And we're going to reward those actions even more than we have already, at a cost of $39 billion to the U.S. Treasury over the next 10 years. At a time when the federal government's running annual deficits of over $500 billion. Now, this bill purports to be revenue neutral. In other words, the tax increases equal or offset the tax reductions. Well, yes and no. As usual around here, with all the smart members and staffs and I guess the tax lobbyists who write their special interest tax cuts into the bill, some curious revenue increases are cited. Some are actually good public policy, the elimination of tax shelters, offshore and domestic. Some are questionable, and some of the so-called revenue gains are simply downright curious. For example, over $17 billion of revenue gains is cited from extending customs user fees over the next 10 years. Now, that's something that we obviously should do and will do. They're existing fees now. We'll extend them over the life of the 10 years that this is scored for budget purposes. We haven't done it yet. But that's a continuation of the status quo. And yet that's being counted as if it were new tax revenue for the purposes of this bill to offset some of these new tax breaks for foreign subsidiaries and operations. We're adding vaccines of hepatitis A to the list of taxable vaccines, $87 million over 10 years. I don't myself understand the reason for that. We're limiting charitable contributions of, quote, patents or similar property. Let me say it again. Charitable contributions of patents or similar property to their cost basis to the donor. Now, similar property is open to interpretation, but it requires some kind of fairly broad interpretation because the revenue gains expected over the decade are over $4 billion. Now, these are charitable contributions. So if an artist, for example, paints a painting, say a well-known artist, the cost basis of that actual picture, the materials, the canvas and the paints and the like, the actual cost of it is quite low. The value of it might be worth tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. The cost basis, if it's just the materials, is going to be a huge disincentive for people who are in that situation to donate their creations, patents, to non-profit charitable organizations. And we're going to gain $4 billion from doing that. Another of the revenue gains repeals the 10% rehabilitation credit for non-historic buildings. It's going to generate $1 billion in revenues. Minnesota, there aren't many buildings that are old enough to be quote-unquote historic, but rehabilitation of other buildings that are dilapidated is certainly a worthwhile public purpose, and yet we're incorporating these kinds of tax increases to offset tax breaks that we're providing for foreign business operations. Doesn't make any sense to me at all. Now, Senator Graham has discussed very well, and I won't repeat his comments, the advantages of this amendment over the existing bill for creating American jobs. Jobs in the United States for American workers. That's what we need. That's what the bill purports to be. That's what we ought to be doing. This bill, as it relates to domestic manufacturers, is a general tax reduction. It requires them to do nothing in return. Now, that's a lot better than providing tax breaks to foreign operations and subsidiaries and the investors in them, but it's not good enough. American businesses reported record profits in the fourth quarter of last year, $76 billion in the quarter, above the previous record profits of $70 billion in the third quarter of last year. Overall, corporate profits were up 20% last year from the year before. Now, we're coming out of a recession, so that's great news for America. And that's not uniform across the board, but that shows a very, very healthy profit picture for most American businesses, and one that we, unfortunately, has not translated into the job increases that we would expect to see, given that kind of profitability and coming out of a recession and employment contraction. And that's what this bill should be focused on. And that's what Senator Graham's amendment does, which is why I'm glad to be a co-sponsor. It provides an incentive and a reward for providing American jobs. If you do that, you get the benefit. If you don't do that, you don't get a benefit because you don't need it, frankly, right now. Between 1996 and 2000, 71% of the foreign companies doing business in the United States reported no U.S. tax liability at all. None. 61% of U.S.-controlled corporations during that time, those 5 years, from 1996 to 2000, also reported no U.S. tax liability. In the year 2000, 82% of large U.S. corporations reported a U.S. tax liability of less than 5% of their income. 76% of large foreign-controlled companies reported U.S. tax liability of less than 5% of their income. These large corporations are not overtaxed. Some of them aren't taxed at all. Now with these foreign credits, they can extend forward for 20 years. They won't, not only will they not pay taxes, they'll be owed rebates, even when they're profitable. I mean, this has really gotten to be the theater of the absurd. And we're giving away tax revenues or out years, especially from the years 2008 to 2013, which is where this bill is backloaded, that we don't have, that we're going to be short of to do the things that we've already committed to do, that are going to add up and extend then beyond that to point in time that's going to add to the crisis we're going to face in the following decade fiscally. We're doing all that for no reason whatsoever except, as someone said, that the tax lobbyists have had their field day and they've got this stuff riddled into the bill, and we're trying to get it out so that it can be put to use for the American workers who, and especially those who want to be American workers who don't have jobs, who pay their taxes on what they earn, whatever little amount that may be, and they're looking for a job. They're going to pay their taxes on that, and we shouldn't be getting into tax avoidance schemes for sending their jobs overseas. We shouldn't be getting into more tax avoidance schemes at all, and that's what the Graham-Dayton Amendment would do. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the balance of my time back to Senator Graham.
Who yields time?